When Trooper John Piper took the oath to serve and protect, it was one of the proudest moments of his life. He had beaten the odds stacked against him. For almost 5 years, he served with honor and distinction. The seemingly perfect life he created came crashing in around him, brought down by his worst enemy, himself.
I began to experience some things internally that I couldn't explain, and it literally began to change who I was as a person.
His was a childhood filled with violence and his father's alcohol and drug abuse.
My father was very controlling and manipulative and threatening. I could never be like any normal kid, and I never had a normal relationship with him.
Despite his difficult childhood and rebellious teen years, John excelled in school, graduated from college, and was recruited by the Indiana State Police.
My dad would come along and then he'd disappear again. It always left some kind of imprint inside of me. And it was that anger that I had been carrying toward my father, that hatred. And my attitude of resenting authority and anybody else, I became kind of like a rogue cop. I had been brought up on charges for official misconduct as a police officer, for theft, for taking bond money, and I left Indiana and I came back to Michigan. I became so angry, blaming everyone else for what happened to me. I took my skills that I had learned as a police officer and I began to commit burglaries in Michigan. I was using that money to buy drugs and alcohol, and by then I was using cocaine too.
He was arrested one night when officers noticed an open door at the back of a grocery store and found John inside.
I heard one of the officers yell over the radio, "He's got a gun." Whenever a weapon is involved in an incident, it makes all officers' blood run cold.
John was in and out of prison over the next few years. His crime spree continued and would cost him dearly, almost 10 years behind bars.
And all I could think about while I was in there was how I could end my life.
It was the jail chaplain who finally managed to break through to John's heart.
It took out a while because I was still battling a lot of pride, a lot of strongholds in my mind. And so God kind of had to chip away at the old me.
He would spend the rest of his time in prison growing in the things of God. He also decided to legally change his name from John Piper to John Collier. He wanted a fresh start.
And I began to see that I did have a purpose in life, that I did have a destiny. I could have an identity again, and that was Christ. By the time I got out of prison, I couldn't wait to run to church with my mom.
And God had someone very special waiting at that church for him. His wife, Lori. They met and married a few months later. It was Lori who first introduced John to Joyce Meyer Ministries.
I still had a lot of struggles and things, emotional battles, spiritual battles that I went through. So I began to watch her on television on a regular basis. She helped break down these barriers, these walls that I had built up in my life. And she just opened a door for God to really speak to my heart. I mean, the Word was already there for me in the Bible, but when I read Battlefield of the Mind, Joyce really laid it out for me on how I could win these spiritual battles. And I didn't want to just win the battles, I wanted to win the war. And I started reading Approval Addiction. I'm looking at the book, I'm reading through the pages, and I'm like, this is me all the way.
John says those books planted the seeds for the restoration of his relationship with his father.
And I confronted my father about his past and his life. And for the first time in my life, I prayed with my dad. And he accepted Christ. I held my dad and we wept together, we cried our eyes out. It was the real deal.
John has experienced forgiveness and healing on so many different levels. He's mended relationships with many in law enforcement. He also has a jail ministry, visiting the very jails where he was once behind bars, sharing the love of Christ with those who sit where he once sat. But because of his criminal record, he is not allowed to go into the prisons in Michigan. It's one reason why he feels so good about his partnership with Joyce Meyer Ministries.
Because of the fact that I'm a Joyce Meyer partner, I can actually sow into the ministry, and I get to go as a partner behind the scenes to help support prison ministry. So actually, my dollars as a partner send somebody else and I am helping support that.
John and Lori have been giving back into a ministry that has greatly enriched their lives so that others can experience what they now enjoy.
If it hadn't been for partners, of course, I never would have seen Joyce or heard her for the first time. I never would have experienced these wonderful healings. I get to be a partner, and I can help sow a seed, and hopefully hundreds, thousands, who knows how many people's lives are going to be changed.
And change is one thing John knows all about.